I hope everybody's good this morning. I was at my wife and I uh, Saturday night went to the Luke Bryan concert out at Truist Park. And Luke, everybody knows Luke, right? I mean, he's a big guy, big star, all that kind of stuff. And he had three warm-up bands. I didn't know any of them, right? One of those was a guy named Bailey Zimmerman. Now, Bailey had very energetic guy, 24 years old, got a lot of energy to burn, and he did a lot of burning on stage. And uh, great performer, and he's at the tops of the charts these days. 3 years ago, he was living in his trailer with his mother, had never written a song, had never played a guitar. And now he's at the top of the charts. He's touring all over the country. He's doing 6 shows a week, that kind of stuff. And at the end of the show, at the end of his time, he took the microphone and just started talking, telling that story, and said, there's 3 things I want to leave with you guys. 3 hints, 3 pointers for life. 1 is work harder than anybody else. 2 is be confident in yourself. And 3 is make sure you got a foundational relationship with the Lord. Now, there are about 30,000 people at Truist Park, and I thought, wow, that's pretty, wait. Some of the language I heard during the concert, and at one point he flipped double birds at somebody or something. I don't have any idea what or who. Maybe it was just part of that song. I don't know. Maybe it's his signature move. I don't know that. But he did. And so I'm trying to equate this is the things that I experienced right here. This is what I saw. And then this is what he's saying. And according to my upbringing, those don't match. Right. And so I automatically said, I'm not sure about this guy. I think he's pulling the wool, I woke up the next morning thinking about that very thing. And I cast myself upon him. I cast my culture upon him. I threw everything that I know about my life and my experience and expected him to live up to that, right? It's impossible for him to do that. He has a different set of experiences, different set of... Last time I was here, we talked about choosing to be on God's side. We looked at the book of Joshua, and I suggested to you that the question is not whose side is God on, but whose side are we on? Are we on God's side? And it hit me yesterday morning or Sunday morning as I was thinking about this. You know what? Bailey Zimmerman can choose to be on God's side. And God accepts Bailey Zimmerman just as he is. Now, are some things that need to change perhaps for all of us when we make that decision? Yeah, sure. We go through the fruit of the Spirit and all those kinds of things, what life should look like as a believer. But who am I to question whether or not Bailey Zimmerman has chosen to be on God's side? That's between him and God. I felt very convicted Sunday morning, because I cast myself as his judge and jury. He can choose that. Today, I thought we'd talk about another guy who very intentionally chose to be on God's side. Oh, he's there. In going back to the book of Joshua, and you must know that for about 7 months, I led a Bible study at our church on the book of Joshua. And I found it to be fascinating. I found it to be incredibly insightful. I found it to be an incredible teaching book for me as a believer today. And so you're getting part of that. So a guy that chose to be on God's side. Let's look at chapter 14. We're going to start in verse 6. I'm going to read a little bit past what's on the screen. So, now the men of Judah approached Joshua at Gilgal, and Caleb, son of Jephunneh, the Kenizzite, said to him, "You know what the Lord said to Moses, the man of God, at Kadesh Barnea, about you and me. I was 40 years old when Moses, the servant of the Lord, sent me from Kadesh Barnea to explore the land. And I brought him back a report according to my convictions. But my brothers who went up with me made the hearts of the people melt with fear. I, however, followed the Lord my God wholeheartedly. So on that day, Moses swore to me that the land on which your feet have walked will be your inheritance, and that of your children forever, because you have followed the Lord my God wholeheartedly. Now then, just as the Lord promised, he has kept me alive for 45 years since the time he said this to Moses, while Israel moved about in the desert. So here I am today, 85 years old. I'm still as strong today as the day Moses sent me out. I'm just as vigorous to go out to battle now as I was then. Now give me this hill country that the Lord promised me that day. You yourself heard then that the Anakites were there, and their cities were large and fortified. But the Lord helping me, I'll drive them out, just as he said. Wow. Here's Caleb walking up to Joshua and making a claim, right? Caleb's walking up to Joshua from 45 years before and saying, this is what was promised to me, and this is what I expect. This is what God has said, and I know that's true. This is what God has said he's going to do, and I'm here now. I'm still as strong today as I was in the day that Moses. Do you think that's true? 85 years old from 40 years old? Yeah, right. I mean, are you? You know, but that's the mentality. That's the spirit of Caleb. He was 40 years old when he went in from Kadesh Barnea. That's the first time we hear about Caleb, is in when he was chosen to go in as a spy, one of the 12. And he goes in, you remember the story, how he went into the promised land, he and the 12, and they did their little thing. They did their tour. They looked at the land, and he came back, and the 10 guys said, you got to be kidding me. Yeah, boy, it's a land flowing milk and honey. It's beautiful. It's great. It's wonderful. We can live there forever and ever, but you guys are really big. You know, they look pretty mean. You should see their cities, man. The walls around those things, we'll never get through those. And you remember Joshua and Caleb said, God's already said it. God's already given it to us. All we got to do is go in and possess it. And now Caleb's saying this 45 years later. Why 45? They only wandered 40 years in the desert. How did the 5 get there? Okay. If we look through the book of Joshua, we know that they fought for about 5 years in the promised land, trying to conquer the land, Jericho and Ai and all those places. So it's been about 5 years since they crossed the Jordan and are in the process of possessing the land. And so 45 years after that promise was made, Caleb comes back. He says, I can do it. So on that day, Moses swore to me, the land on which your feet have walked will be your inheritance and that of your children forever, because you have followed the Lord my God. Caleb has held on to this promise. He's held on to this dream. He has assumed, he's counted it as fact that what God says is true. It just kind of seems like, guys, that through all of this, that obviously God had chosen Caleb way back when. And through all of this, it seemed like God thought that Caleb was a guy that I can trust with a dream. I can give Caleb a promise, and I know he's going to hang on to it. And he's going to hang on to it no matter what. You remember that Caleb was born in captivity, Egypt. He's one of the ones that came out of Egypt. He's one of the couple that we know about that came out of Egypt and went into the promised land. So he's born in captivity. He's born as a slave. And think about what Caleb has seen through the years. Yeah, he was probably a small guy, but he was there when all the plagues happened. He was there when God came and freed them through miraculous acts. And he was there when they crossed the sea. And he probably looked back and he saw the Egyptians being buried and thought, wow, God is God. He was there through the wandering in the desert. He was there standing on the precipice of the promised land at Kadesh Barnea and thinking, that's it right there. It's just right there. God's given it to us. Let's go get it. And he was there when the people said, no, let's walk around a while. Think about it. And so he's wandered through the wilderness for 40 years, thinking all we had to do was step across and be in it. That there was ours. I might have given up by then. I might have said, hey, man, look, we were right there. We were on it, you know. If we didn't get it then, we're not going to get it. It's not going to happen. God just parked me somewhere beside the river, you know. Let me watch the ducks swim and let me fish for a living and let me just kick back for the rest of my years. I'm 85 years old. Lord, let me just chill out for a while. Let the young people do it. Let the next generation take over. But he held on to that promise. And so now he's reminding Joshua, the other guy who was born a slave and crossed the river into the promised land. Remember what he said, Joshua? You remember what Moses said? Moses said, you got this land if your feet walked on it. And he's claiming that promise. Click it, man. Old school. So God had trusted Caleb with this dream, and Caleb was coming through. Caleb was showing God that it's okay. You can do that. He probably wasn't quite as strong physically, spiritually, and mentally. He was stronger. I would suggest to you that Caleb had a very tenacious faith. It's a faith that persists. It's a faith that just keeps going. It's a faith that can't be set aside. It's a faith that is always in the forefront of his mind and heart. It's faith that God is God. Click it, man. And what God said, God said. And because God said it, it's a fact. You know, there's this old bumper sticker that we used to see. You know, God said it, I believe it, it is so. You can leave out the middle. Doesn't matter if you and I believe it or not, it is so if God said it. And that's the kind of faith that Caleb had. And he said, give me the hill country. He said, give me that country where the Anakim are. You remember the Anakim? You know who those are? You think, you remember whether or not Caleb had any experience with the Anakim? Remember the Anakim are the giant people, the large folks, when they went through the land in Numbers chapter 13 and they came back with a report, they said, man, those guys are giants, they're big, we can't take them. That was the Anakim. Okay. The Bible specifically says in Numbers 13 that Caleb had been in the land of the Anakim on that tour. He had seen them. He knew what he was getting into. He walked before God and said, I want the big guys. And I know they're big because I saw them. And I want what the people 40 years, 45 years before had said, no, we can't do it. They're too big and too mean and too tough. Joshua said, we could have done it then. Caleb said, we could have done it then. And I can do it now. Because back then, God said, it's yours. Go take it. Now God said, it's still yours. Go take it. With God's help, we can still do it. So he's hearkening back. Amazing, tenacious faith, pursuing a dream that God had given him. Because God said it. Just because God said it. Look at verse 6. Now the men of Judah approached Joshua at Gilgal, and Caleb, son of Jephunneh, the Kenizzite, said to him, you know what the Lord said to Moses, the man of God, at Kadesh Barnea. Look at verse 10. Now then, just as the Lord promised, he's kept me alive these 45 years. Verse 12. Now give me this hill country that the Lord promised me. Lord made any promises in your life? Lord ever told you anything, said, hey, this is going to be yours, that's going to be yours? Lord ever told you, man, look, I got special plans for you? He told Caleb that a long time ago. Have you let go of those? I think I have some of those, you know, because I, unlike Caleb, didn't have the faith to take the victory. We didn't have the faith to pursue that. I didn't have the faith to keep pushing along. If it don't happen tomorrow, it's probably not going to happen, right? That's kind of the world we live in. God, make me a promise, but make it happen before noon. You know, God's promises last forever. Yeah, you did good on that one. Caleb said, I'm 85 years old. I'm still strong, but more importantly, I'm still hanging on to that promise that God made. So for you and I, as we get a little more mature, David, as we grow a little bit more, as we experience a little bit more, I think Caleb would say to us today that age is not a consideration when it comes to just doing what God says do. I've got 4 kids, 2 sons, 2 daughters. And I really don't know why I'm fixing to tell you what I'm going to tell you, to be honest with you. My 2 sons don't believe there's a God. My 2 sons were raised in a household that centered around Jesus. My 2 sons were raised with the gospel. My 2 sons can tell you what the gospel is. They can share the gospel with you, but they just don't believe it. I'm a retired missionary. Okay. I don't feel retired most days, but we were on the field for 20 years as missionaries. So what's wrong with me? How can a missionary of 20 years have 2 sons that don't believe in God? How can that happen? What did I do wrong? What did I not do that I should have done? Both of those questions have a lot of answers, no doubt about it. But somehow I take it as my fault that my sons don't believe there's a God. Way back yonder, when they were born, my wife and I claimed a promise for all 4 of them that they would be believers, that God would use them in an incredible way. That doesn't mean in the public and all that stuff, but use them in their life in an incredible way. They're both very accomplished. They're smart. They get that from their mom. They do well in business. They do well in their life. They got good, good marriages and all those kinds of things. And I don't know if I could get up every day if I didn't have that promise from God to hang on to. If I didn't have that dream from God about my sons to cling to, God's still going to use them. I have no idea how. I have no idea what I'm supposed to say to them every time I see them. I know that God gives me the words, and he has, and he will, and he continue to do that. But without that promise to hang on to, how would I live? How would I go about my day? How could I stand before you and even begin to suggest what God says in his word? It's because of that promise. Because God said so. And it is so. That's not today, but it is so. Caleb did exactly that. Caleb grabbed on that promise. And he said, God said so. So it is so. And he's reminding Joshua, don't you remember? Don't you remember what God said? Give me the big boys. Give me the challenge. Give me the big fight. I don't want down by the river. I don't want to spend my day fishing. I want to spend my day running the Anakim out of the land like we should have done 45 years ago. They're still there, though God told us to run them out. Let me take care of it. You can click it. Oh, yeah. Caleb knew what he was getting into because he had been there. He had seen them. He had walked in their land. He had seen what that land had to hold for him, but it also saw the people who were holding the land. And he jumped in anyway. He went for it anyway. You know, last week I was trying to get something done at the office, you know, with Community Assistance Center. And I, you know, I got a board member who's a great board member. He does a lot of stuff for our CAC. He's a really sharp guy. And he continually tells me, Francis, if it ain't hard, it ain't fun. And to some extent, I believe that. You know, although some days it gets pretty hard where I can't find the fun, you know, and that's where I was last week. And there's some certain thing, you know. And so I'm trying to find the fun in the middle of this difficult situation. And I keep harking back to the fact that as I look back, I have no doubt in my mind, no doubt in my heart, but that God brought me to where I am today. One day I'll tell you the story of how we came to be the CEO of CAC. I mean, it was just God put things together. I knew nobody in Atlanta. I'd been to Atlanta one time in my life. I'm from Mississippi. We don't go to the city. You know, knew nobody. And I always heard it doesn't matter what you know, it's who you know to get these jobs and things, you know. I'm standing before you as a dispelling of that myth. You know. But I don't have any doubt but that God put those things together. So when that time comes, when I can't find the fun, I've been there and done that. I know what I'm getting into. I know God brought me to this spot. So it's like I told my staff last week, we got to be 10 toes in. We got to be 10 toes in to whatever God has led us to do. Caleb was 10 toes in. If he'd had 12 toes, he'd been 12 toes in, right? All out. Caleb knew what he was getting into. So Caleb's been holding on to this dream. He's got this tenacious faith, this faith that won't quit. He knew what the lay of the land was, and he knew what he was asking to do. So did it work? Did the dream come true? Was the dream realized that God had made for Caleb way back when at Kadesh Barnea? Yes. He got the Anakim finally. You know, and as we read on through Joshua and later in Scripture, we see that he actually went into the land and he ran those guys out in the land we call Hebron. You ever heard of Hebron? What do we know about Hebron? You remember that guy named Abraham? By the way, Abraham was the one the promised land was promised to 400 years before all of this is taking place, right? Abraham moved to Hebron. God said, I'm going to take you to a place you don't know about yet. You've never been there. I'm not going to even really tell you where it is. I'm just going to guide you there. And he guided him to Hebron. You remember a guy named David? Slingshot David? Solomon anointed him and he became king at Hebron. Hebron's a significant place for God's people. And here's Caleb walking in to take it over, run the Anakim out, pursuing that dream that God had given so many years ago. Tenacious faith leading him through that. I would suggest to you that as Caleb walked through that land, he had on the full armor of God. And you know what? He hadn't even read the New Testament. He still had on the full armor of God. Why? Because of his faith. Because the faith that he had, faith that he held on to, the faith that he pursued tenaciously, the faith that nothing could shake, the faith that comes only from an absolute 100% belief that God is God. And if God said it, it's a done deal. Remember that back at Kadesh Barnea? Caleb said, it's already ours. There's no question. It's ours. We just got to step over there. He finally got to step over there. So from the accounts of the life of Caleb, we see a man who is fully trusted in God, a man who had absolute faith, a man who pursued that faith, a man who knew the things in front of him. He had seen the things in front of him. And even though they looked big and they looked dangerous and they looked overcomable, he marched right in because God had said it. I don't know, man. I don't know how every day Caleb could wake up and knowing the Anakim are out there. I'm not sure I would have. I might have stayed on the other side of the river. I might have gone back over with Reuben and Gad and the half tribe of Manasseh, and gone back to the east side where the land was good and we could raise some cattle and we could just kind of chill out the rest of our life. I might have done that, right? I'm not Caleb. Caleb did what God brought him to do. Is that what we're doing? I hope so, man. I hope so. My prayer every day is that as I walk through the day, I'll walk with integrity. I'll have truth in my life. I'll speak truth. I'll live truth. I'll be truth, right? And I'll just do the right thing all day long. That was Caleb. He lived by, he hadn't read that either, but he lived by that. In the Bible study that I lead at our church, that we work through Joshua, we're now doing a study of the creeds of history and how they came to be and what impact that might have on us, and how they the creeds were developed to be a statement of the essentials of our faith, And so these are, when Bailey Zimmerman flips double birds at the concert, is that an essential of the faith? Is that something that I can criticize him on for his faith? Is that one of those essentials? I went back Sunday morning and I looked at the creeds that we've studied so far, the old Roman Creed, the Nicene Creed, the Chaldean Creed. Flipping the bird wasn't in any of them. Wasn't in one of them. So what I got to look at Bailey Zimmerman through is the essentials of the faith. As far as I know, he's pursuing those. It didn't look like it to me on stage, but as far as I know, he is. The essentials of the faith, that anchor that we hold on to. You and I have a distinct advantage over Caleb, right? Why? What do we have that Caleb didn't have? What do we have that wasn't available to Caleb? Jesus Christ and his word, right? This makes it easy for us, right? This means yes, that means no. All right. Yeah. We look back at those guys that wandering in the wilderness and think, how stupid were they? All they had to do is walk into the promised land. They were right there. How stupid are we? We got the full account of it. And we still don't walk into the promised land. All right. Enough of that. Caleb was a man of faith, tenacious faith, pursuing a dream because God had said it. My prayer for us is that we do the same. God's got a dream that he wants to give each one of us. And maybe he already has. Maybe he's already given you that dream. Maybe you don't even remember it anymore. Right? But it's still out there. God remembers it. I got a few questions I put together for you guys to talk about at your tables. That's kind of, I think, that center around what we've been talking about. Never really know, David. But feel free to have at that discussion at your tables.